Last time, we talked about how all the contestants were preparing for winter, fortifying their shelters and storing food. Now, it's time for the final showdown. Let's see what standout performances the contestants have in store for us. By day 27, Alan caught several fish at the same spot again. Considering the quick spoilage of the innards, he usually eats them first. Honestly, they're quite unpalatable, and occasionally he even encounters a poisonous gallbladder, but he has no choice if he wants to survive. With temperatures dropping, fish catches will decrease, prompting him to build a smokehouse to preserve the fish he caught. Busy until evening, Alan went fishing again, but after a long time at the old spot, he caught nothing as it was getting dark and he could barely stand. Just then, his fishing line jerked. Excited, Alan focused on reeling in, not noticing his reel falling into the water. It's a crucial tool for survival, and he risked hypothermia by retrieving it from the water, for without it, he'd have to rely solely on hunting. Fortunately, the water at the shore wasn't deep, and he soon retrieved the reel. The next morning, Alan continued perfecting his smokehouse. After sealing all gaps with moss, he was ready to test its effectiveness. He laid out the sliced fish on the rack and collected birch and willow branches, which have relatively low fat content, making the smoked fish not only healthy but also mildly fragrant. Now with an ample supply of fish, he felt more confident facing the challenges ahead. By day 29 at 1 a.m., Mikey, listening to the wind outside, experienced insomnia again and took 2 hours staring at the camera before falling asleep. The next morning, the wind speed increased, indicating an impending storm. While other contestants took shelter, Alan remained outside, his fish not yet smoked. This weather greatly affects one's mindset, and a poor mindset can easily lead to withdrawal. To distract herself, Melanie began refurbishing her mattress, while Mikey chose to pass the time playing dice. The rain continued until 5 p.m. Mikey was so hungry he couldn't sit still. He decided to go hunting with his bow and arrow. Unfortunately, he found nothing near the camp and had to search further afield. This decision quickly paid off. Mikey stealthily approached a grouse and successfully shot it down. After a hearty meal, he thought of his beloved wife. To express his longing, he not only wrote a letter in the blood of the grouse, but also read it aloud to the camera. On the 30th day, the storm gradually subsided. Alan had managed to save some food, which he was eager to preserve from spoiling due to the rain, so he started smoking fish early in the morning. While guarding his spot, he planned to make a new fishing lure. The new lure proved effective, catching a large fish quickly, though it unfortunately got away at the shore, much to Alan's frustration. Alan was incredibly frustrated but remained at his post for a long time. Melanie built a storage room, which the previous night's strong winds had damaged. She could overlook the wood and tinder, but she needed to recover the berries stored inside. While eating them, she began to cry, explaining that the SD card was intended for her husband, but the production team did not allow private content, so the video was made public. Today marked Wyatt's 31st day in the competition. Recent storms had torn holes in his fishing net, but he didn't want that to delay his fishing. After repairing the net, he hurried to the lake to cast it. He caught a big fish there and hoped to catch even bigger ones given the still moderate temperature. To prove his devotion, he decided to disclose an accident that occurred 7 days prior when a splinter had pierced his forearm, which had been oozing pus for the last 2 days. If neglected, it could lead to a systemic infection, so he boiled spruce water daily for disinfection. Taz had no intention of foraging as his food supplies were ample. His main task for the day was to install a front door and finish a half-made stool. First, Taz used trap wire to outline the door frame, then selected uniform branches, which he trimmed and arranged neatly, securing them with nails he had found. This completed his cabin. He then finished the stool by cutting short sticks and fixing them to the frame, and managed to make a makeshift couch as a reward to himself. Taz decided to feast on a whole grouse. However, when he opened his storage box, he was shocked to find the grouse and smoked fish covered in maggots. Reluctant to throw them away but afraid to eat them, he decided to take them back to camp for cleaning, as they were his food supply for the next 10 days. The cleaning process almost made Taz quit the race, but thinking of the prize money and his children's expenses, he ultimately made a pot of grouse soup, eating very carefully to avoid gastrointestinal infections. The camera then moved to Alan, who had lost 32 pounds so far. He hoped to catch some fish to gain some fat, but instead caught a duck, which he could hunt with his bow and arrow but not with his fishing net. So he decided to let it go. Hunting restrictions had made him miss 2 opportunities already. On the 10th day, he had released a catch and dismantled all his traps. To save the duck this time, he had to cut many parts of his fishing net, which would take hours to repair. So he returned to his old fishing spot. Due to the winds and cooling temperatures, most of the fish had moved to deeper waters. Alan fished for a long time, aware of a good fishing spot a kilometer away, where the waves were smaller but the risks higher. He planned to try his luck there soon. Survival Challenge, Day 32. Melanie has been resting in the shelter for a few days. Upon going outside, she discovered many trees were blown down. There's no time to clean up now. She must find food quickly. Exploring along the coastline, she notices the water beginning to freeze, signaling that winter is approaching. The days of surviving on berries are numbered. However, worse things were yet to come. Melanie felt weak and breathless after walking just a short distance, forcing her to quickly return to camp. She has lost 66 pounds and is severely malnourished. Her food stores at home consist only of birch bark and moss, which are fine for short-term sustenance, but unrealistic for long-term survival. The scene shifts to Alan. Yesterday, he had no luck fishing, so he pinned his hopes on the fishing net, which a duck had previously torn a large hole in. It took a long time to repair. Hoping to fish immediately after fixing it, he found the lake edge unsuitable when he arrived. The net disappeared into the water. Left with no choice, he moved to a new area. Before exploring, he made sure to carry a bow and arrow in case he encountered a moose or black bear, which could potentially win him $500,000. As he suspected, not far from the camp, he spotted fresh moose tracks and found a calm lake, perfect for fishing. Alan decided to stay, thinking that even if he didn't catch fish, he might still encounter a moose. Unexpectedly, he got a bite as soon as he cast his line, but the fish got away halfway through. After fishing for a while longer and changing locations, he finally caught a fish, only to lose it just before reaching shore. Frustrated and with nightfall approaching, Alan packed up and headed back to camp. Today is Wyatt's 34th day in the competition. He woke up at dawn, unable to sleep, feeling as if the lake's fish were calling him. He grabbed his lure rod and went to the lake, quickly getting bites. He estimated one fish to weigh around 13 pounds, enough to last him another week. Wyatt wanted to catch more while the fishing was good, but he was infuriated when he lost his last treble hook, making future fishing difficult. As an experienced hunter, he soon found signs of grouse and did not hesitate to shoot one down. Before he could even show off his catch, a nearby squirrel could not stand it and met its fate. This is the strength a survival expert should have. With resources available, he would not go hungry. When he checked his fishing net at the lake, he found a large white fish waiting for him. A great day for team member Wyatt. Mikey, once considered a rookie, has also become a hunting expert after the storm. He hunted 3 grouse in a row, adapting more and more to life here. Today, he aimed to hunt a moose or black bear. With his skill and sharp mind, he soon spotted a squirrel. Unfortunately, before he could aim with his bow, the squirrel darted under a slab. Mikey decided to stop and sit, listening to the falling leaves and waiting for nearby animals. Soon, there was movement. He approached cautiously and shot an arrow, hitting his mark. Although squirrel meat is hardly filling, it's better than eating moss. Having survived here for a month, this was Mikey's first squirrel hunt, and he eagerly anticipated this new dish. After roasting it, he ate not only the tongue, but also the brain. Alan was doing well, relying solely on fishing for his needs. However, since switching to a new lure, he kept losing fish. Thinking about the abundance of fish in the area, Alan couldn't resist fishing again. Learning from his past experiences, he replaced his hook with a smaller one. After casting for about 30 minutes by the lakeside, his fishing line finally twitched. The new hook was indeed sturdy, and within seconds, a fish was flying out of the water. It had been a long time since Alan felt this thrill. He quickly secured his catch and continued fishing. Soon, another fish bit, but unfortunately, he pulled too early and missed. The fish seemed to give him another chance, but Alan exerted too much force and snapped the line. The confidence he had built shattered in that moment, feeling worse than the pain of losing a hook. Taz thought he had it rough, but worse was yet to come. Planning to dry and eat the shrimp he caught, he found half of it stolen by a mink. Taz vowed revenge but prioritized checking his fishing net over settling scores. Catching any fish seemed better than eating mink. Unexpectedly, the rope securing his net had broken. Fortunately, the net hadn't floated far. Unfortunately, it was badly damaged by the waves and needed considerable repair. So, he decided to set some traps first, ensuring at least one source of food. The woods showed plenty of squirrel activity, and he believed he'd soon have fresh food. The scene shifts to Melanie. Others couldn't last a month hunting, but she survived on berries and moss. Nearly fainting while berry picking a few days ago, she revived herself with boiled moss. With local resources depleted, Melanie had to expand her search area. Today, her luck was decent. After walking for an hour, she managed to gather a bag of blueberries, but this hardly compensated for the energy lost. It seemed more like a test of will. Today marks Taz's 35th day in the competition. He started by vowing to take down a moose, but hadn't seen any so far. His food supply would last only about 5 to 6 more days, so he headed to the lake early. Taz, who grew up in a fishing village, excels at fishing. Within minutes, he hooked a fish. Though small, the quantity was significant. Soon, another fish was hooked. However, to ensure longer survival, contestants often ration their catches. They make fish head soup and dry the meat for preservation. While Taz was enjoying his fish soup, he suddenly heard noises behind him. Cautiously investigating, he rushed up with his bow and arrow. This mink had stolen his fish several times before, but today Taz caught it red-handed. He fried its organs for dinner. Enjoying the mink's tongue and brain, Taz found the meat more flavorful than fish, fueling his desire to hunt larger animals. As Alan was about to fall asleep, a mouse climbed onto his arm. Instantly feeling murderous, he decided to set a figure-4 trap. This trap is simple to make and highly effective. He believed he'd soon enjoy some wild roasted mouse. To avoid tangling his line again, he added a section of steel wire. The bait was also smaller than before, but the current low temperature thwarted his efforts. Alan fished for hours without a catch. Suddenly, a grouse appeared behind him. Seizing the opportunity, Alan silently followed it with his bow ready. Once the target was locked, he drew his bow fully. It had been over a month since he had fish and berries, and today was the first time he hunted a grouse. Fishing was clearly off the table for the rest of the day. He decided to eat the grouse first. After a full meal, Alan wanted to rest, but was awoken by a rat gnawing at his sleeping bag. He knocked it out with a heavy blow, sending it reeling. Mikey also had his share of troubles with rats, which disturbed his sleep all night. He managed to catch 4, enough for a meal, though they were small and tedious to prepare. If not for the $1 million prize, he wouldn't choose this life. He planned to roast 2 rats tonight for a taste and save 2 for soup tomorrow morning. On day 37 of the survival challenge, Taz checked his traps early, having spotted moose tracks days before. However, after a long search, he found neither the moose nor any other catch in his traps. A sudden strong wind made hunting impossible, so Taz returned to camp to showcase his craft skills, like making a ukulele, much finer than previous seasons, complete with a soundboard and realistic structures. The instrument turned out well, though his singing did not. The wind also made it difficult for Melanie to start a fire. Already limited to berries and boiled bark and facing a water shortage, she decided to improve her kitchen, conserving energy by only building what was necessary. Unlike others who used moss and lichen, she used rotting birch bark, presumably after consuming all available moss. After these tasks, Melanie boiled water, feeling a profound loneliness and shedding tears of hunger. Mikey, though also hungry, had more body fat and had stored leftover bits from his hunting and trapping. He ground these bits into powder to make Mexican meat pies, which, though hard to swallow, replenished essential fats. After failing to find game but discovering a berry patch, he knew he had to store as much as possible before the food sources dried up. He collected a large bag of berries, cooked them, mashed them, and filtered out the moisture to make jam. Combined with the meat pie, the meal was more palatable. Meanwhile, Wyatt, who was nursing an arm injury that had become infected over 11 days, knew he couldn't stop. Stopping meant starving. Despite having fish regularly, he had lost over 40 pounds. If he couldn't fish more before the freeze, given the dropping temperatures and fish retreating to deeper waters, his physical condition wouldn't last much longer in the competition. Melanie, who had survived 38 days on moss and berries, found her diet increasingly difficult as temperatures fell below zero. She tried drying and grinding rock tripe in a pot to make a unique type of flour. Although this carbohydrate source was abundant, the resulting taste was hard to stomach. She thought she would go hunting or fishing after eating, but instead, she found herself missing her husband back home, her physical condition nearly at its limit. Taz is much better now. He faces the first ray of morning sun, playing his homemade guitar, singing and dancing to make the best of a tough situation. It must be said that his attitude is indeed good. His spiritual needs are met, but not his material needs. He knows shore fishing is now hard, so he takes out his homemade boat. Full of confidence, he heads to the center of the lake. After casting his line, one would expect good fishing before the temperature drop, but that's not the case. No matter what Taz tries at the lake's center, he catches no fish and feels utterly disheartened. Suddenly, he can't hold back his emotions anymore. He says he's hungry, tired, and misses his wife deeply, shedding tears as he speaks. The weather also worsens, with freezing rain and snow falling. Mikey can only stay in the shelter, thinking of his autistic son at home. He decides to make a puzzle for his son's birthday. Feeling guilty he can't be there this year. After finishing the puzzle, Mikey hangs it on a dream catcher, hoping it will protect his son from nightmares. By day 40, the weather deteriorates further, and the temperature drops. Ice forms on the lake's surface. Wyatt, despite an injured arm, remains optimistic. The sporadic snowflakes signal another challenge. Some contestants brave the snow to find food, while others rest in their shelters. Everyone is struggling to survive. Fishing is risky in such weather, but the woods might still yield some berries, mushrooms, or even moss. However, as the production team's boat arrives, some contestants choose to give up. Everyone thought Melanie would be the one. But surprisingly, Taz gives up. His outcome is unexpected. He had food and excellent hunting skills, yet he has lost nearly 50 pounds since the start. Physically and mentally exhausted, he says he's dizzy, weak, and lacks the confidence and strength to hunt elk. He misses his children and regrets leaving the competition, but he doesn't want to compromise his health. He hopes for a speedy recovery after returning home. On day 41, Alan wakes up to find it snowing and icy outside. Fortunately, his shelter is sturdy with good stability and insulation. Now, with only 7 daylight hours, finding food becomes much harder. Without enough food stores, survival would be difficult. Alan has lost 3 of his 9 arrows and decides to modify 2 blunt arrowheads to better hunt grouse and squirrels, preventing arrow loss. He uses wild stones. Wyatt would stay in his sleeping bag all day if he hadn't run out of firewood. After gathering today's firewood, he needs to check his injured arm, which has been festering for days. He suspects a wood splinter wasn't properly removed, and indeed, he finds a 1-centimeter splinter, longer than the one he removed before, hoping its removal will help heal his arm. Melanie, who neither hunts nor fishes, is even less likely to go out now. Unfortunately, she discovers a large hole in her sleeping bag caused by a mouse looking for warmth. The biting cold wind through the hole makes her night miserable. Her immediate priority is to repair this hole. At this moment, the advantage of being a woman became apparent because she had intentionally worn an underwire bra. Removing the underwire, she could use it as a needle. With a snap, the underwire was cut, and after sharpening it on a rock, it was as good as a large embroidery needle. As for the thread needed, she resourcefully used material from her bra. Melanie's handiwork was surprisingly good. She quickly stitched up the hole and could now sleep comfortably again. Mikey, the strongest lie king of the season, was certainly not going out. Being away from his son for this period, his guilt intensified, so he used his free time to make toys for his son. This activity served not only to pass time, but also to remind himself to keep going. He planned to return with the toys and prize money to treat his son's illness. On day 42 of the survival challenge, Wyatt was the first to start a hunting mission. Before that, he needed to eat some mushrooms because if he didn't, the mice would finish them off. Normally, he wouldn't even look at such food, but in the freezing conditions, any food was precious. After thoroughly cooking the mushrooms in a pot, he tasted a piece to check for poison. While testing for toxins, he began checking his traps. Although the traps were empty, there were grouse footprints in the snow. Following the tracks, he quickly located a grouse and successfully shot it. There were a few more nearby. Wyatt carefully walked a few steps closer, drew his bow fully, and shot another arrow, easily securing 2 grouse. The old hunter's archery skills were indeed impressive, having missed no shots during these days. Now, with the mushrooms confirmed safe, chicken stew with mushrooms was on the menu. In no time, the grouse was cleaned. One roasted over charcoal, and the other made into soup, making life incredibly enjoyable. Today, Alan was also eager to hunt. Considering the calm lake surface, he decided to check his fishing net first. Hoping for a catch, he arrived at the lake only to find the net still empty. Since the start, his net had not caught a single fish, making him suspect it was defective. With no choice left, he tried fishing, a spot that usually yielded fish. As Alan expected, it took less than 10 minutes for a fish to bite. Unfortunately, he failed to catch any. Not wanting to return empty-handed, Alan then turned his attention back to grouse. However, after searching the woods for a long time, he found nothing and was too exhausted to continue. Alan had no choice but to return to the shelter to rest. If resilience could eliminate other contestants, Melanie would easily win the championship. Unfortunately, this was a hunting and survival game. Honestly, the mouse wasn't even enough to fill a gap in his teeth, but in such harsh conditions, any protein was highly valuable. After preparing the ingredients and waiting for dinner, Melanie became emotional again, endlessly expressing her longing for her husband, with tears streaming down her face once more. In contrast, Alan was doing much better. Today was his 52nd birthday, and Alan decided to indulge a bit. He made a birthday cake from smoked fish, using twigs stuck into it as candles.
My triple-layer birthday cake. Happy birthday to me.
After celebrating, he threw the cake into a pot to make cake soup. The mix of fish and soup was incredibly delicious. This birthday was truly meaningful. The sense of fullness filled Alan with energy, and he decided to check the fishing net again.
What?
The previously ineffective net surprisingly held a large fish, weighing about 5 or 6 pounds. Alan was so excited, showing off the fish in front of the camera, non-stop. For the first time since the start, I've encountered such a big fish. Just scaling it takes a lot of effort. This fish, along with the provisions in the shelter, should be enough for him to survive for a while. The remaining days just require enduring the loneliness. Winning $500,000 is still possible. Mikey originally planned to catch a few animals for food, but after wandering around for a long time, he saw nothing. With no other choice, he had to return to the shelter to rest. In such an environment, it's easy to break down when idle, so he has to keep himself busy. Mikey found a large nail somewhere and planned to forge it into a tetanus blade. First, he lit a fire by the lake, then threw the nail into it, repeatedly heating and hammering it. After 2.5 hours, the knife finally began to take shape. Then he filled a bucket with water to quench the knife and extinguish the fire at the same time. With the knife ready, a sheath was needed. He carved a hollow in a log, made another half by the same method, and bound them with wire. A set of jungle knives was ready. On day 43 of the survival challenge, Melanie, having eaten a rat, couldn't stop craving protein. So, she decided to try her luck by the lake. Unfortunately, no matter how much she swung her arm, it was futile. It must have been the spot. She changed locations, but only faced more disappointment. Melanie's spirit completely broke down. The once strong and optimistic woman couldn't hold back any longer. After much thought, she decided to quit. To have lasted 43 days on berries, moss, and a single rat was already impressive. One could tell from her weathered face that she had aged significantly. She lacked solid hunting skills and wasn't skilled in fishing, but her spirit was truly admirable. May she recover soon after returning home. Today is Alan's 45th day in the competition. Although he has consistently caught grouse and fish, he has lost nearly 50 pounds. To preserve the little fat remaining on his body, he decided to keep fishing by the lake. The fish bit quickly, sustaining him for another couple of days. Catching such a big fish in the final round could be a key to victory. However, Alan remains cautious, aware that Wyatt is also a top-notch fisherman. If he could catch fish, so could his opponent. But his fish was somewhat special. Its innards were filled with white worms, clearly infected by parasites. Improper handling could lead to a high risk of infection, and the prize money might not even cover medical expenses. So he decided to clean it thoroughly and cook it longer. Unfortunately, He cut his finger while filleting the fish, and now he could only leave it to fate. After preparing the fish, he smoked one piece and boiled the other half vigorously to kill any parasites. He needed to check carefully before eating. Although the resulting fish meat tasted awful, it was relatively safe. The camera moves to Wyatt, a pragmatic contestant. As the weather slightly warmed, he prepared to go hunting again. After shouldering his bow and arrows, he checked the fishing net. Wyatt didn't expect to catch any fish, but surprisingly, there was one weighing over 3 pounds. Every fish caught in the final round brought him closer to the championship. Today, he could finally enjoy some meat. Carefully, he scaled the fish and then split it into 2 pieces. The tender meat was indeed a timely blessing. Mikey had made it this far, losing 60 pounds. His hunting skills were never fully developed, and with the ongoing low temperatures and snowfall, there were no provisions left in his shelter. He decided to try his luck outside. Due to the continuous cold, some diurnal animals chose to forage during the day. Animal tracks in the snow were easier to identify. Even if he didn't encounter moose or black bears, catching a few grouse or squirrels would be good. However, things often don't go as planned. After wandering around for most of the day, Mikey only found mouse tracks in the snow. Reluctantly, he returned to the shelter to wait for his mouse trap to yield something before he could go hunting again. Survival Challenge Day 48. After eating a sick fish, Alan currently feels no discomfort. A sudden drop in temperature has made him realize he needs to catch and store more fish before the lake freezes. Unfortunately, he's not lucky today, as the fish have moved to deeper waters.
Whoa! No! Oh, shoot! So my spool just went in the water.
Previously, he retrieved a fishing line. Now, in these temperatures, he wouldn't dare to enter the water. Had he not prepared a spare reel, he might have considered quitting. After retrieving the reel, Alan's fingers are numb from the cold, forcing him to return to the shelter to rest. Mikey is dealing with an abundance of rats, catching 2 in one night. The skinned rats are only the size of a thumb, thinner than a duck's neck. Seeing the charred small rats, Mikey reflects and misses his family, his resolve to win wavers. Meanwhile, Wyatt had a filling breakfast and has 8 large fish fillets stored at home. Despite the lack of hunting success in the woods, he checks his fishing nets by the lake and catches a large barracuda. Pulling up the net, his confidence in winning the season is solidified by catching the biggest fish of the season. He plans to ration it for a week. Mikey, on the other hand, is out of resources. Yesterday, he used moss as toilet paper, and today, he starts eating it, trying to imagine its sauerkraut. The harsh reality snaps him back. Before the snow, he could gather grouse and fish. Now, his strong will is focused more on missing home than making toys. While Mikey is busy crafting, a black mink dashes through the bushes. Seeing a significant source of meat, he chases it with his bow and arrow, but misses his chance. He comforts himself while crafting, but real disappointment awaits. Upon returning to the shelter, he finds it ransacked, the 2 rats eaten by the mink. Now, with nothing left, his endurance is uncertain. Survival Challenge. Day 50. The island is again covered in snow. The temperature hits an unprecedented low. It's now a true test of resources and mental strength. Alan knows his rival Wyatt is still competing, so he continues to forage. Even though the rocks by the lake are thinly iced, knowing the fish have moved deeper, he still attempts fishing, but returns empty-handed. He needs to quickly make fish soup to replenish his energy, considering the increasing difficulty of obtaining food. Wyatt, waking up to a snowy landscape, remains spirited, confident thanks to his ample supplies. Uncertain how long the weather will last, he plans to gather more wood, working from day to night, enjoying roasted fish and humming tunes in the evening. Late at night, a change in wind direction causes the moss in the chimney to catch fire. Fortunately, the noise wakes Wyatt. Had he slept deeper, it could have been disastrous. He spends the rest of the night awake, watching the wind, and repairs the chimney in cold winds using stones instead of moss, hoping it won't catch fire again. Mikey, unclear what he's eating, has survived another 3 days and a daze. Today, on his birthday, he sings a birthday song on camera and shows the gifts he made during these days. Today is Wyatt's 53rd day in the competition. Snowfall is worsening the survival conditions. Temperatures have dropped to sub-zero. Hunting or ice fishing are out of the question. The wisest action is to stay in the shelter. Thus, Wyatt has stockpiled a great deal of firewood to prevent excessive heat loss. Mikey seems desperate from hunger. Already on the verge of collapse, he starts eating snow as food. Melting snow internally consumes a lot of heat, risking hypothermia. Just fetching water from the lake causes numbness and pain in his legs and feet. Mikey states he is no longer shivering, indicating he has entered the second stage of hypothermia, where core body temperature can drop to 15 degrees Celsius. His safest option now is to crawl into his sleeping bag. Unexpectedly, his trap catches a rat, the 21st one, which excites Mikey. For today's lunch, he decides to have a feast using berries stored a month ago along with the tiny rat, pulling himself back from the brink of collapse. The camera shifts to Alan. He has been mostly sleeping for the past 2 days. He drinks melted ice when thirsty and relies on his body fat when hungry, trying to maintain his physical condition to avoid being evacuated by the safety medical team. He is using up wood faster than food. Previously focused solely on food, he now collects firewood. Although not as dire as Mikey, Alan feels exhausted, needing breaks after every 3 logs sawed. However, the thought of ice fishing soon boosts his spirits. He plans to make snowshoes to prevent falling into the water during ice fishing by assembling processed sticks and tying them to his shoes with parachute cord, believing he will soon be ice fishing. Wyatt, looking at the soon-to-freeze lake, first thinks of going out to hunt. Before that, he needs to check his fishing net. However, the path is just snow and trees. He finds no game and almost slips. Reaching the lakeside, his beard is frosted, and the fishing net is covered in a thick layer of ice. Such a scene makes him worry. It seems unlikely he will catch any fish, and just hopes the fishing net can still be retrieved. Wyatt uses a stick to break the ice on the net and, with great effort, retrieves it, finding it empty as expected. Now the net is useless. With the Arctic approaching polar night and only a few hours of daylight, he needs to consider new ways to find food. On day 55 of the survival challenge, Mikey remains in a hibernation-like state, speaking weakly. The waterproof cloth above is frozen, making him feel like he could freeze to death at any moment. He wishes the crew would come and tell him the other contestants have left. When the crew does arrive, it's just for a medical checkup. Mikey's shelter is dark with no heating, relying solely on his resilience. 3 of his 5 toes are numb, a clear sign of frostbite. After checking his vital signs for safety, the medical team decides to evacuate Mikey. Anticipating the outcome, he hesitates but eventually withdraws. He wants the $500,000 prize, but values a healthy body more to continue supporting his family. As always, the departure of each contestant is respectable. Enduring this far with strong willpower from his son, he is a true warrior. Today marks the 56th day of the challenge. As hunting becomes increasingly costly, Wyatt starts preparing for ice fishing. To prevent falling into the water while fishing, he decides to make an ice ladder. This is safer than snowshoes, though it requires more energy. Wyatt, undeterred, chops a hole in the ice with an axe and uses a specialized rod to measure the depth, only to find the water level unsuitable for fishing. The ice is too thin in deeper areas. With no other choice, he tries his luck, but after 2 hours catches nothing. He might as well have stayed in the shelter. On day 57, Alan's condition worsens. He feels dizzy when bending over and his urine turns orange, indicating a health issue. He ventures onto the lake, breaking the ice with all his strength, then fetches a large bundle of moss from the shore. The sugar alcohol in the moss melts the ice and prevents the hole from refreezing. Alan kneels by the hole, praying for a catch, but the bone-chilling wind soon drives him back. Wyatt's ice fishing also fails. Today, he decides on a new strategy: to cut a slit in the ice and set a gill net, protecting himself from the wind and allowing for all-day fishing. After untangling the net, he returns to the ice with his ladder, digs horizontally from yesterday's hole, and secures the gill net with sticks. By evening, a fierce wind blows. Wyatt notices he's lost a toenail, a sign of his body's distress from prolonged cold and dehydration, the numbness of frostbite masking the pain. But there's more bad news. His shelter catches fire again, luckily extinguished with nearby water. Despair hits hard with the loss of a toenail and the shelter fire, forcing him to endure the night without fire. Most would have quit, but Wyatt, having come this far, refuses to give up. The next few days test both men's wills. On day 60, he falls off camera. Both remain in the shelter, resisting to the end, with Wyatt managing to kill a rat barehanded. By day 63, the cold prevents Wyatt from checking the gill net, which has disappeared. All hope seems lost. With little food and facing a gale, Wyatt's resolve shakes. On day 64, facing the dawn, he realizes his limits and calls to withdraw. His departure is followed by the arrival of the crew's plane. Facing the camera, Wyatt is at a loss for words, having pushed both body and spirit to their limits. Had he known he was the second last remaining contestant, perhaps he could have persisted to day 65, already proving his strength. Hopefully, he recovers soon after returning home. With Wyatt's exit, this season's champion is declared. The crew discreetly arranges a medical check for Alan, who, despite being skeletal, presents his best to avoid forced withdrawal. Unaware of his victory, he excitedly shows his wife around the shelter, sharing his daily activities and experiences. For him, the $500,000 prize is secondary to the invaluable experience of 65 days alone in the wilderness, a journey beyond monetary measure. Thus concludes the 10th season of Wilderness Alone.